Perfect. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So,
Let's introduce ourselves.
okay, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Hello, Harvest of Hope Christian Center and Campus. My name is Desiree Brown, and this is my husband,
You can introduce me.
Vernon Brown. And we are so excited to bring this new series called Practically Speaking. So I'm going to turn it over to Vernon. He's going to give us a little bit more about what we can expect tonight.
Perfect. So practically speaking, we kind of dreamed up together, and the idea is to take the Bible, which sometimes isn't the easiest book to read. We all have opened it up and read a few verses and said, I don't even know what that means or how it applies to my life. So we wanted to take a few Bible verses, a few Bible stories, if you will, and really break them down to what they mean in 2020 in our real life. So
Right.
today we're going to dive into the book of First Samuel. So we'll be in First Samuel chapter 1, verses 1 through 20. So I'll repeat that and give you a chance to grab your Bible so you can follow along with us. That's First Samuel chapter 1, verses 1 through 20. It's a lot of reading, but I promise you we're going to get through this. Just stick with us for a little while, okay?
So while everybody's pulling it up, I do want to say hey to those on the line. Hi, is it Cutie?
Yep, cutie.
Cutie,
Guys.
Cutie guys. I see Bishop Shaw is on. Hi, Jessica. Hi, Miss Wanda. Hi, how are you guys? Hope you're having a good day. And thank you for joining us this evening. Please go ahead and share it. You can share it with other people so we can bring in some more folks and we can all study this word together.
Absolutely. Let's go ahead and hop in.
All right. So have you all found First Samuel chapter 1? Just send us a quick chat. Say, yes, I got it.
Say, I found it in the chat. We're going to go ahead and get started reading it.
If not, it's right here on the screen. So you can say, I found it on the screen. All right. All right. So let's go ahead and read through First Samuel chapter 1. And we're going to read verses 1 through 20. All right. So there was a certain man from, let's see. Okay. Ramathaim. We're going to go with that one. A Zephutite from the hill country of the Ephraim, whose name was Elkanah, son of Jeroham, the son of Elihu, the son of Tuhu, the son of Zuph, and Ephraimite.
This is why we are doing this. We can do this together.
He had two wives. One was called Hannah and the other Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah had none. Year after year, this man went up from his town to worship and sacrifice to the Lord Almighty at Shiloh, where Hophni and Phinehas, the two sons of Eli, were priests of the Lord. Whenever the day came for Elkanah to sacrifice, he would give portions of meat to his wife Peninnah and to all her sons and daughters. But to Hannah, he gave a double portion because he loved her, and the Lord had closed her womb. Because the Lord had closed Hannah's womb, her rival kept provoking her in order to irritate her. This went on year after year. When Hannah went up to the house of the Lord, her rival provoked her till she wept and would not eat. Her husband Elkanah would say to her, Hannah, why are you weeping? Why don't you eat? Why are you downhearted? Don't I mean more to you than 10 sons? Once they had finished eating and drinking in Shiloh, Hannah stood up. Now Eli the priest was sitting on his chair by the doorpost of the Lord's house. In her deep anguish, Hannah prayed to the Lord, weeping bitterly. And she made a vow saying, we can go to the next slide. And she made a vow saying, Lord Almighty, if you will only look on your servant's misery and remember me, and not forget your servant, but give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life, and no razor will ever be used on his head. As she kept on praying to the Lord, Eli observed her mouth. Hannah was praying in her heart, and her lips were moving, but her voice was not heard. Eli thought she was drunk and said to her, How long are you going to stay drunk? Put away your wine. Not so, my lord, Hannah replied. I am a woman who is deeply troubled. I have not been drinking wine or beer. I was pouring out my soul to the Lord. Do not take your servant for a wicked woman. I have been praying here out of my great anguish and grief. Eli answered, Go in peace, and may the Lord and may the God of Israel grant you what you have asked of him. And she said, May your servant find favor in your eyes. Then she went away and ate something, and her face was no longer downcast. Early the next morning they arose and worshipped before the Lord, and then went back to their home in Ramah. Elkanah made love to his wife Hannah, and the Lord remembered her. So in the course of time, Hannah became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She named him Samuel, saying, Because I asked the Lord for him.
There is a whole lot going on there. Did you guys make it with us? If you made it with us, go ahead and put yes, I made it inside of the comments. But there's a whole lot of information that is in there. And you know, when we first started reading through some of those names and getting through some of those pronunciations, is pretty difficult, but we're going to get through this together. So let's take a moment to kind of break this down verse by verse and kind of talk about exactly what it means and what it means in our life in 2020. Because I know my name's not that hard to say, so hopefully we can find some common ground here. So first and foremost, as we kind of go through the story part by part, Peninnah had children, but Hannah had none. So let's even take a step farther than that. The kind of the centerpiece of this story is a guy named what?
Elkanah.
A guy named Elkanah. And Elkanah actually had not one, but he had two wives, one of which was named Peninnah, who had children, and also Hannah, who had none. So we see an example here of already off the bat, there's a person who has children, which in those days meant a lot. I mean, you had to be able to birth a son to carry on the family name. So that had a lot of weight to it.
Right. And also, it had some financial implications as well, because it's like you have your sons, and that is how things were passed on and all of that kind of thing. So it was a really big deal in that time to have sons and daughters, but especially sons. And I do want to point out, we did not mention, if you want to follow along with us, of course you can follow along here on Facebook, but there's an app. If you go to app.harvestofhopems.com, we've got notes in there. You can follow along, fill in some things as we go along here.
Great. So as we talk about the story here, so Peninnah and Hannah, we already know how important it is to bear a son. So already, because Hannah's unable to have a son, you can almost see her feeling as if she's less than. She doesn't feel as womanly. She doesn't feel as wively. She doesn't feel as important, quite frankly, as her, I guess, counterpart, if you will, or her rival, as we find out later, because she's not able to have a son. So let's keep moving. So as we read throughout the story, whenever the day came for Elkanah to sacrifice, so whenever he went to the temple to pray, to make a sacrifice on behalf of his sins and the family's sins, he would give portions of meat to his wife, to all of her sons and daughters. You know, obviously it was only one person's sons and daughters, because there was only one person in the relationship that could bear children. But he would give a double portion to Hannah because he loved her and because the Lord closed her womb. So I think this is so interesting because Hannah can't have children.
Right.
So she feels like she's lacking something. But on the other hand, her husband in this instance actually gives her double. So she doesn't have something on this one hand, but on the other hand, she's getting double for her trouble, if that makes sense.
Right.
So continuing, I think another interesting thing to pull out of here is when you talk about her womb being closed, why can't she have children? It says very clearly in verse 6, because who closed her womb? The devil closed her womb?
It wasn't the devil. Not this time.
Not this time. It says because the Lord closed her womb. Now, you know, whenever we have issues or challenges or problems, I think a lot of times we're really super quick to say, oh, it was the devil that did it. It was some issue that happened. It was perhaps some sin that I had. Now, we don't know why the Lord chose to close her womb, but we know this challenge that she's facing was actually brought on by her heavenly Father and not the devil in this instance. So, you know, when you look at your life, don't always think that everything you're going through may be because you did something wrong or because the devil may be after you. It could be the Lord using this to teach you. It could be the Lord using this to perfect your faith, or it could be the Lord using this so that thousands of years from now, someone can read about your story and hear about your faith, and that'll become your testimony.
Right.
Anything you want to add to that?
No, that was great. Keep
Perfect.
going.
All right. So we know Hannah couldn't have a son. Peninnah could. And we also know that her husband, you could say had pity or had that cared deeply for her
Yeah.
because he loved her. And he also understood that she could not bear children. So those two reasons are given in the Bible as to why he gave her a double portion. So let's keep going. So it says, after the Lord closed her womb, her rival, who's the rival?
The rival was the other wife.
The rival is the other wife. So we can already start to see what's happening in this relationship. It doesn't say they're friends. It doesn't say they're confidants. It says they're rivals. So it's not that positive of a relationship. But her rival kept provoking her in order to irritate her. Ain't that something? It sounds like a hater right there in the household, don't it?
Yeah.
So the one wife understands that the other wife can't have children and is provoking her or just ticking her off because she knows she can push that button to get under her skin.
Right.
So there's a whole lot going on in this household right now. I'm sure nobody's getting any sleep right about now.
Yeah. I mean, she basically, Peninnah was basically just poking at her
Insecurity.
There you go. Yeah. She was just kind of, it says provoking. So she was just kind of like just poking at it, it was already a touchy subject anyway. And she was just like, okay, well, I'm going to touch the button and I'm going to make it real hot in here.
Exactly. So let's keep going. So she kept provoking her till she would not eat. And her husband would come to her and say, Hannah, why are you weeping? Why are you crying? So we know this is getting under her skin. It's not just, hey, you're calling her out of her name, you're getting under her skin, but she's brushing it off. She's to the point where she's crying now. So her husband says, why are you crying? Why are you not eating? This is real serious if you're not eating. And why are you so downhearted? Don't I, as your husband, mean more to you than 10 sons? So her husband is discerned that, okay, I know this is going on between the two of you, but it's not really about the two of you and your relationship. I know this is about you being able to have children. So that's some discernment that's happening there.
Right. And I mean, have you all ever experienced a time in your life where you were so deeply troubled by whatever challenge you were facing that you cried about it?
That's a good question.
I think that's a pretty common response. And you guys can share in the chat if that's something you've experienced. But what about not eating? Have you been so just overwhelmed, have been so stressed, or just experiencing something where you just can't eat? It's happened to me maybe twice because I like to eat. But but have y'all experienced something like that? And if you have, then you know, like, that's really deeply troubling this person.
Yeah, it's one thing for someone to say that your head's big or, you're not smart and that, be something that it doesn't really hit you. But for you to have that response, that's a whole nother level of pushing the right button. And she lives with this lady. So that's something that she's feeling and living with over and over, day after day, which I'm sure gets old really quickly.
Absolutely.
All right, so let's see. So when they had finished eating and drinking, so this sounds like this conversation between her and her husband happened over food. So we got her to eat finally. After the conversation, Hannah stood up. Now Eli, the priest, this is a new character here. So you could think of him as the pastor or something such as that. Eli, the priest, was sitting on his chair by the doorpost at the Lord's house. So they're now at the church where Hannah and where her husband go to pray. And in her deep anguish, Hannah prayed to the Lord, weeping bitterly. Now, I don't know about your prayer life, but there's a prayer that you say at the dinner table. There's a prayer that you say when you need something from God. And there's a prayer that you say when you're in trouble or where things really hit the fan and you really need something from God. And that's where I think she is, weeping bitterly. What do you think?
I think so. I think she was at her wit's end. She knew that there was nothing that she could do and that it would only be God that was going to change her situation. So she just wept.
Exactly.
She wept.
So in this moment of weeping, she made a vow to the Lord. Now, we've all done this where we've gotten in trouble and said, Lord, if you get me out of this, I will always be faithful. This isn't that kind of prayer. She said a similar thing, but she was certainly genuine. And actually, we'll find out in later sections, she actually followed through on it. She gave her son to the Lord. But just to read what it says here, this is her prayer. Lord Almighty, if you will only look on your servant's misery and remember me and not forget your servant, but give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life, and no razor shall be used on his head.
Mm.
That's a serious prayer.
Mm-hmm.
She said, in my misery, can you look down upon me and can you give me this blessing I've been asking for?
Right.
And so I don't think this is, and it's not written for us to see, but this doesn't sound to me like a one-time prayer and you kind of leave it there. It sounds like she was doing this year after year after year,
Right.
that she was dealing with this barrenness.
Right.
And it got to this point where the story kind of reads on here.
Right.
So as she kept praying to the Lord, Eli, this is the pastor, the priest at the time, was looking at her mouth, and Eli thought she was drunk. Now we've prayed and we've asked God for a lot, but for you to pray to the point where somebody looks at you and says, she's drunk, that's some serious praying, right? That's not just some wake up in the morning, Lord help me. That's some serious praying.
Yes. Yes.
I don't know if any of you guys out there have had a prayer time like that, but when you get to that kind of prayer where people think you're crazy,
Yeah.
I mean that's serious stuff.
Praying out of her mind.
Praying out of her mind. But so I think one of the key things here is when we look at the miracle that happened, we often just look at the miracle and say, yep, God did that, great. But when we look at what Hannah did, not to make the miracle happen, but to certainly help it along, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
She continued and persistently sought God. She prayed seriously, and she prayed to the point where she didn't care what people thought around her. She didn't
Yeah.
care what was happening. She knew she needed God in that moment, and God delivered.
Right. It's like a petition. She petitioned God. So
Mhm.
like if we think about a petition in modern times, usually like if you want something done, you can put together a petition and you have to write up a document, and then you get a lot of people to sign it. In this case, it doesn't sound like she had to have anybody else to co-sign on her what she wanted from the Lord.
She signed all by herself.
She signed all by herself. So that's the kind of praying that she was doing.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's keep going here. So when Eli walked up to her and said, how long are you going to stay drunk? Put away your wine. She had a choice to make. If somebody were to walk up to you and say, you look drunk, or you look like you had a horrible day, or you look rough, we all know the two options to how we can respond to that. We can respond in saying, no, this is what's really going on, or we can kind of get ticked off because somebody called us out of our name or out of whatever we thought we were supposed to be. So in this instance, she responded in saying, where is it at? Hannah, not so, my lord. I am a woman who is deeply troubled. I have not been drinking, but I've been pouring out my soul to the Lord. Just listen to that transparency.
Yeah.
In that moment where she could have flew off the handle and snapped on him and said, I'm not drunk. How crazy do you think I am? She was just really transparent in that moment to say, this is what I need. This is what I'm asking God for.
Yeah.
And him being the priest or the pastor or the man of God, I'm sure that was something that meant something to him for her to be that transparent.
Yeah, and I was actually curious, like what might have, was it just like a discerning thing, or like what made her feel comfortable enough telling him like this is what's going on? But it does say that he was a priest, so perhaps it was just his position.
That's true.
He was a trusted person, because it's not often that we would just like open ourselves up to say this is what's going on with me, but she did in this case. She did. So, and I'm glad she did.
Absolutely. I mean, hey, we have the benefit of learning from her story now because she did.
Right.
So when she responded, I was pouring out my soul to the Lord. Eli then responded. Once again, Eli is the priest or the pastor here, saying, go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant what you have asked of him. She said, may your servant find favor in your eyes. And she went away and ate something, and her face was no longer downcast. So it almost sounds like in that moment, she had some assurance that her prayer was answered.
Yeah.
She had the faith, the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen, to say, when I get up from here and I go back to my life, something changed. Something was different in that moment.
That's right.
That's something I think we can all have in our prayer life, to where, we ask God for a lot of things, but how many times when you pray, do you get up from your knees or from wherever you're praying, wake up and say, I know God heard that. I know God will answer that, but even if he doesn't, I'm still going to walk away with faith that he can, and he has the power in his hand.
Right.
I think if we walked away from our prayer life with that kind of experience or that kind of faith, we'll see a lot more movement from God.
Right. And I think another thing that's interesting about this is that he, although she didn't need a cosigner, he basically, we talk about touching and agreeing. It was basically a touch and agree type of situation where he was like, I mean, he saw her pouring out her heart. He saw her, I mean, to the point that he thought she was drunk, and he was like, "Look, I mean, whatever it is that you're asking for, I'm with that. I agree with you. Go in peace, and I pray God has heard you."
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what's the next part of the story? You can take this part because this is the good part.
Yeah. So so after she's feeling more hopeful, she started to, uh, yeah, she's just started to feel more hopeful. She's eating and everything
Hmm.
now.
Hmm.
So she left, and this is when she went back home to her husband. She it says Elkanah made love to his wife Hannah, and the Lord remembered her. So, wow, like to be remembered by God, that's a big thing.
I think we breeze over that so many
Yeah.
times, but God is a busy guy. I mean, he has a lot of people. This is how I think about it in my mind. He has a lot of people to look after. Like he
Yeah,
has a lot of stuff going on,
it's
and
true.
all powerful, all knowing, but still. For him to for it to be written, like imagine your name there, like God remembered Vernon, or God remembered Desiree, or God remembered Cutie, or God remembered Andrea, or Dwayne. Like think about how amazing that is,
Yeah,
that you were on God's mind in the moment that you needed him to come through, and he
right,
remembered and took action. That's amazing to me. I don't know about you, but that's amazing.
right. And just to think that the simple remembrance of God is what caused her womb to be open, and she became pregnant with her son Samuel, and and she also followed through. Already began to follow through on her promise because she named him Samuel, saying that because I asked the Lord for him. So like even his name is like an honor to God, which is amazing.
So let's talk about the time span here, because that's important. So
Yeah.
they made love. The Lord remembered her. And then how long does that process take before the baby shows up? That's another 9, 10 months for that
Yeah.
before that baby shows up.
I know about that.
Right, exactly. And after that period, she still remembered that this isn't something that I did. This wasn't luck. This wasn't the moon aligning. This was God. So she
Mhm.
remembered that prayer. She remembered that answered prayer for that entire pregnancy and still followed through on it, naming her child Samuel, saying it's because I asked the Lord for him.
Yeah.
That's powerful. That's
Amazing.
amazing. So those are all the verses we have for today. Like I said, I hope you got something from this. We really want to just take passages of scripture and just break it down. Like even when we started reading this, it was a lot of words that were difficult to understand. But to just summarize, a family. It's a family of people, a husband and two wives.
Yeah.
One could have a child and had children, one could not. They had friction between the two of them. Because of this friction, this woman would go and pray and try to get this thing changed. She was praying so fervently to where someone that was observing her thought she was drunk. She said, "No, I'm not drunk. I'm just really trying to get this prayer done, really trying to get God to move in my life."
Yeah.
She goes back home. God moves in her life and she follows through on her side of the agreement.
Yeah.
So we really want to leave you with a few questions. Like I said, if you go and download the app we have for Harvest of Hope, if you go to app.harvestofhopems.com, download the app, click the study portion. There's actually some fill in the blank questions and also some notes you can take so you can continue as you do your reading in your own quiet time or however you choose to read your Bible and spend time with God. But a few questions we have here, or just things to think about. Year after year, Peniah would tease and taunt Hannah until she cried and would not eat. The question for you is, how do you respond when people speak negatively about you or when things don't go your way? I think there's an important lesson
Yeah.
here, and I think there's something that we can all really grow from and really trying to be better about how we deal with, the term of the day is haters. I don't know if they called them back in these times, but how we deal with haters, how we deal with people who just don't want what's best for us. How do we deal with those things? So those are some questions that you'll find in the application. We really encourage you to go take a look at those. I think it'll really be good for you to, not just listen to this one time and then move on, but hopefully it'll be something that you read through in your own time, answer some of those questions, and really ask God what he wants you to hear from in this season.
Yeah, and as you all likely know, this is our first time doing this type of format
Mm-hmm.
for Harvest of Hope, and so if you would, please download the app, follow along, kind of do your deeper dive into this reading, into the scripture, and let us know what you think. Let us know if it helped you. Let us know if you were able to hear a bit more from God or get a bit more out of the text. So That would be amazing if you could just come back here and comment and just let us know what you thought of that.
Absolutely. So you can find us here every week in December on Thursdays at 7 p.m. Central, 8 p.m. Eastern, and we will see you next week.
All right. Thanks, guys.
All right. Bye bye.